back to another edition of the Prepper Recon Podcast. Our mission is to bring you great interviews with preppers from around the world so you can be better informed and better prepared for everything from a hurricane to the end of the world as we know it. This episode is brought to you by CampingSurvival.com. Whether your plan is to bug out or bug in, CampingSurvival.com has all of your preparedness needs, including bug-out bags, long-term storage food, water filters, gas masks, and first aid kits. Check them out online today at CampingSurvival.com. Be sure to enter coupon code PrepperRecon for a 5% discount on your entire order. Today's guest is Debbie Gunno of Little Red, White, and Blue Schoolhouses. Debbie, thanks for coming on the show.
Very glad to be here with you. Thanks.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. Tell us about Little Red, White, and Blue Schoolhouses.
Well, it's a concept that I came up with. I go to retreats with like-minded conservative ladies, and I was talking to the ones that were there that homeschool their children. And, you know, I've always been curious because I didn't homeschool my daughter, but curious how things operate and work in that arena. And I said, well, what do you do when, you know, the subject isn't something you're necessarily good at, or you might need to take, you know, a couple of days off to take care of family errands and things. And I said, so how do you guys deal with, you know, schedule issues? And they said, oh, well, we just form little co-ops. You know, we get with other families in the area that are homeschooling their children, and we help each other out. You know, we cover for errand days or, you know, doctor appointment days, and you know, somebody might be better at math than someone else, and somebody might do well with history or grammar, and so we just kind of share and you know, build off of each other. And I said, oh, well, that's great. Well, you know, I got to thinking about it, and I'm going, well, you know, there are families that have the desire to homeschool their children, but they can't. You know, both parents have to work to put food on the table, keep a roof over their house, or it's a single mom who, you know, has to obviously work and can't stay home and be a stay-at-home mom. And so I'm like, you know, it'd really be great if we couldn't come up with some kind of a homeschool co-op or a neighborhood school or co-op like that to do homeschooling. And then that way, you know, kids that don't have parents that can homeschool them, that could possibly go to this little co-op school and get the homeschooling education rather than going to public school. So thought through it and brought up the subject with a few other people, and especially with some homeschooling moms and that, and I came up with a concept of the Little Red, White, and Blue Schoolhouses, and it's basically a non-government school, no government impact on it whatsoever. So you're not taking any funding, you're you know, not doing any thing that would line up with the curriculum that's being handed down by the school department, or excuse me, the State Department of Education or Federal Department of Education, anything like that. You're actually setting up your own curriculums for your little school. You find a place to do it, either in a church if they'll allow you to come in and set up in like the Sunday school building, or you find a vacant storefront, you know, an old shopping center that has an empty place in it, and you talk to the person that owns it and say, hey, you know, this is what we'd like to do with it. You could write it off on your taxes if, you know, you'd let us use your facility as a school. And you go in and set it up with tables and dividers and such. And what you do is you then market it to the families that are homeschooling, but also marketing to those that can't stay home and homeschool. And no tuition. Try to get a good benefactor to help you out. But basically for the parents that can't be there to help teach or whatever, they have to be, you know, they have to participate in this in some manner. So you ask them on their day off or in an evening, you know, they can come in and clean the school, they can help paint, they can help with supplies. There's a way that they can contribute rather than just being there in the teaching capacity. So that would be the manner of their basically their tuition. And the thought is to make sure that it's a faith-based education, one where you start the day off with a prayer. You teach morals. You also started off with the Pledge of Allegiance every day, and also teach good civics and citizenship that go hand in hand with manners and morals and respect for others. So you're not only turning out educated kids, but you're turning out well-rounded kids where they have a concept of what it is to be successful in a society, so that they can work, they can participate, and do so on a proper level rather than on a level that's going to get them in trouble or whatever. So I find that that's one of the issues that we have with our kids today, is they're no longer being taught what it means to be an American citizen or a good citizen, and they're also not being taught morals anymore. If they are being taught morals, they're being taught the skewed morals of what a government thinks is appropriate and not what the parents think is appropriate. So that's basically Little Red, White, and Blue Schoolhouses. Definitely not in a nutshell, but that's the concept that I came up with. So I share that with anybody when I've got parents who say, "Oh, I'd love to, homeschool my kids, but I can't." I said, "Well, here's a concept that I have. Why don't you find other parents at your church or other parents in your neighborhood that are homeschooling and see if they'd be willing to, set up something like this and actually get back to the old way of educating our kids, which is a community school and away from the federal government's intervention."
I think that's a fantastic idea. My sister is looking for some alternatives for education for her son, and he'll be going to school in the next couple of years, and she's petrified of putting him in the public school system, but she doesn't have any desire at all to homeschool herself, and private schools are just so expensive, so I think that that's a great alternative, and I think that's something that could really, really catch on. Now, how did you get involved in the education arena?
Oh, goodness. I'm a career Air Force officer.
Well, thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It was my honor and my privilege to serve. I had a fantastic career and wouldn't have changed it. But during that time, over the time that I served in the Air Force, I was in education and training capacities, and never did any school degree work in education, but always had a desire to teach. And then when I retired from the Air Force, I got involved in the grassroots movement, the conservative movement, to live up to my oath that I took when I was in the Air Force. And people that I met during that introduced me to Common Core, and it was brought to my attention that this was something that was being levied upon our schools, and I'm like, that's not what our schools were set up to do. Our schools were not set up to live up to the demands of the federal government, but they were there to educate our children, and we've gotten so far away from that it's crazy. So I just took an interest in it and did the research, met some amazing people who have been in the education arena for decades, and through them have become educated myself on what's really been going on with our schools since probably the late 1800s, but more current have been going on at least since the mid-1970s.
And you mentioned Common Core. Can you just briefly tell us, or not so briefly, maybe a good explanation if you'd like, what is Common Core, what's it supposed to be, and what is it really?
Okay, Common Core is being sold to us, being marketed to us as a set of standards that is going to make it easier to educate our children. They're supposedly more robust standards than what we currently have, make it easier for children to move from state to state because we'll be teaching the same thing across the U.S. except for the states that chose not to do Common Core. But it is being sold as a set of standards, state standards, that will produce better educated kids. Unfortunately, that's not what it is. And people, take it on face value, until they're faced with their children having, been exposed to Common Core at school, and then they're going, well, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And so parents are now waking up and figuring out that something has to change. But what Common Core really is, Common Core is the newest name of what is referred to as outcome-based education. And outcome-based education has been around for decades. And it basically is a way of modifying behavior. Outcome-based education is its goal was brought about through social engineering, and primarily Professor B.F. Skinner is the one more known by everybody. The name is more known by everybody, but it is a process of changing the behavior of our children and making them compliant, so they don't question government, they don't question, what they're being told to do by, even their teachers and in local communities and such. So it's not what it's cracked up to be, obviously, as far as improving education. One of the things that really opened my eyes, I read a book that's called Back to Basics Reform, or OBE, Outcome-Based Education, Skinnerian International Curriculum. And in reading this, I found quotes, one of them from a Dr. Spady, back in 1982 at a conference he was speaking. He stated that there were agenda items behind what was being referred to as mastery learning. That was the name of outcome-based education at that time. It's been called many, many things since then, but in 1982, one of the hidden agenda items given by this professor was a system of supervision and controls which restrains behavior of kids. The outcome of the hidden agenda should be the fostering of social responsibility or compliance. And what's happened is, over the years, they will introduce outcome-based education. I call it outcome-based indoctrination. But they will introduce it, they'll get pushback, so they'll pull it out of the system, and then they'll try it again a few years later and get it a little bit further ingrained because, people just aren't as aware, and they've learned, how they can introduce it a little bit quieter. And so it's gotten to the point where each time they introduce it, they get it in a little bit deeper. And now we've evolved into Common Core. Predecessor to Common Core was No Child Left Behind. Other titles over the years, like I said, was Mastery Learning. We had School to Work. We had Goals 2000. And they just come up with all of these names that basically equate to the same thing. We want to change the behavior of kids so that we turn them out into being these good little compliant drones. And they've reduced what they're teaching. They don't teach our kids our history. They don't teach our kids our founding documents anymore. They don't teach them cursive. And, when I first heard that they weren't teaching cursive, I was like, well, that's kind of odd. Why would they not want to teach our children how to write? Why wouldn't they teach them penmanship anymore? And, I thought, well, it's because they're trying to reduce the individuality. Because for me, anyway, as I was learning to write in cursive in my high school years, I would develop my own style. I'd practice it and come up with different ways of doing my lettering. And develop my own signature, develop my own style. And I was like, well, it's how are you going to sign checks if you can't sign your name? You're going to put an X? You're going to print it? What's the deal? And then I got to thinking, well, maybe they're not teaching cursive because they expect everything to be done on the computer in the future. Well, again, what are you going to do as far as signing your checks? Well, kids now just type in their checks into their iPhones with, and take a picture of it. The next thing is it's deposited into their account. So I guess they don't need to sign their checks. But so I got to thinking about it, and why is it that they're not teaching cursive anymore? Well, a friend of mine pointed it out to me, and it was like this light bulb going off. Our founding documents are in cursive, and if you can't write cursive, you can't read cursive. So how are you going to read our founding documents? You're going to have to rely on someone else to interpret them for you, to actually print them out for you so that you can read our founding documents. And you have to rely on the honesty of that person to actually translate them into printing or onto a computer exactly as they were written. So again, it gets down to what are we trying to do with our children with outcome-based education and the way our school systems are being run these days. We're not teaching history beyond, 1865 now, I think, here in Florida. We're not teaching cursive. We're not teaching spelling. We're teaching whole word when it comes to reading. And spelling supposedly is being picked up as they learn how to read. My daughter was a product of the outcome-based education that was introduced back in the mid-70s, and again then in the late 80s and early 90s. She was taught to read by whole words. She wasn't taught phonics. She can't spell today for love nor money. We are deliberately dumbing down, or I should say, the progressive education reformers are deliberately dumbing down our children so that they have compliant drones that will not question government in the future. And this has been going on for so long that you have parents today who have been indoctrinated in that manner, so they don't see anything wrong with the way their children are being indoctrinated by Common Core. And it's not until they have, the second grader who's only supposed to have half an hour of homework is sitting there 3 and 4 hours later in tears, no longer wants to go to school, is trying to find excuses for not going to school. They don't enjoy reading anymore. And parents are telling me these horror stories and then saying, what can I do? Where do I go with this? So, parents need to be aware. Grandparents need to be aware. Grandparents need to be helping with their grandchildren's education and ensuring that, they're being educated in a manner that we were. I mean, American classical curriculum is what I push. And it's what fueled an American industrial revolution. It's what put man on the moon. And why are we changing it? Why do we have progressive education reformers saying that our education system isn't good enough and we have to fix it? when we no longer have the imagination, we no longer have the people who are inventing things like we did back when we were using American classical curriculum. And that's where we need to get back to.
Yeah, our founding documents certainly don't have much of a message of compliance in them, do they? So I guess that could be a real problem.
Right. Absolutely.
And when you were explaining the little red, white, and blue schoolhouses, you were talking about a faith-based education. I think it was Benjamin Rush that said, by removing the Bible from schools, we would be wasting so much time and money in punishing criminals and so little pains to prevent crime. Take the Bible out of our schools and there would be an explosion in crime. In 1963, the Supreme Court ruled that the Bible could no longer be used as curriculum in public schools. Is our society better off or worse off because of that ruling, in your opinion?
We're worse off. Because right now we have, and again, this is my opinion, right now because we are not using faith-based education, morals, I'm not talking about going into schools and teaching religion. I'm talking about, what's right, what's wrong. I'm talking about, what's it take to be able to work within a society and not be the criminal within the society. So in my opinion, by not having either the Bible or at least a faith-based education, our children are basically just running wild's the best way to do it. They're rampant. They don't have any structure. They don't have the foundation to make the right decisions. I talked to the local school superintendent because there's a thing going on right now. It's called sexuality education. They actually have standards for sexuality education. And I was talking to the school superintendent, and I asked him, I said, are you teaching health in schools, or are you teaching sexuality in schools? And his answer was, because, quote unquote, the family's broken down and it's not done by the families anymore, it's up to the schools to make sure the kids understand sexuality and the health that goes along with it. But, he said it's up to them to be sure that the kids are educated to a point where, they don't come to school with sexually transmitted diseases and that they understand, where those come from. And I'm like, but it's not your job. It's not your job to teach our kids sexuality. It might be your job to teach them health, but it's not your job to teach them sexuality. And, if they're going to teach them sexuality, they need to teach them morals. And I know they're not teaching them morals because they can't have the Bible in schools anymore. They can't have a faith-based education in schools anymore. So we're teaching them sexuality without the morals that go along with it. So it just instills curiosity. It instills a lack of respect for yourself because, it's all okay to do what you want. And so, for me, I think a faith-based education is critical, or at least a moral-based education is critical, so that the kids are being able to make those right choices.
And then,
by the way,
sure.
One of the things for public schools, and I have one of the original primers, and I don't have it in front of me. I wish I did because I'd read you the title of it, but it's a little blue book. It's not very big at all. And it's a little primer for a school from, back in the early 1800s, if I recall. And the book is full of scripture. They teach the alphabet through through Scripture. They teach words through Scripture. One of the original purposes for public education was to teach people to read so they could study the Bible in Scripture. And we have gotten so far away from that.
Yeah, I think originally one of the first things that Congress did was to have Bibles printed for schools. And I think that was about the extent of the federal government being involved in education in any way at that stage of the game.
Right. Absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
And now a year before 1963, the Supreme Court ruled that prayer didn't belong in school. And you were talking about in little red, white, and blue schoolhouses that you would open the day with prayer under your program. Now, rather than turning to God, I think our children are largely being taught to turn to the pharmaceutical industry when they have issues that are too big to deal with. Do you think that's a systemic problem for our culture?
I do. And going back to the Skinnerian behavioral modification, there was an explosion, during the 80s, with children being identified with ADHD or ADD, and everybody was then dispersed Ritalin, and a lot of the kids that were in the classrooms were handed a little pill to take rather than teaching them to deal with life. And so you have children that can't deal with stress, they can't deal with change, because all through their childhood they were given a little pill and told that this is the way that you deal with things. And so they aren't being taught to to look at their issues and their problems and pray about them. Instead, they're being taught to look to this little pill to help them deal with their issues, or to even look to government to help them deal with their issues. So that's all that behavioral modification and the intent to turn out compliant little drones.
Sure. And then sometimes it sort of backfires on them, because Eric Harris, one of the Columbine shooters, he was on Zoloft at one point, and then switched over to Lovox. I think that's what he was on at the time of the shooting. The Aurora shooter, James Holmes, he was on lorazepam, which is an anti-anxiety drug. Connecticut refuses to release Adam Lanza's records, but his uncle claimed that he'd been on an antipsychotic called Fanat, and I'm sure if they had evidence that he had not been prescribed any type of antipsychotic drug, I'm sure they'd be happy to release that information, because it would serve their agenda.
Sure, absolutely. The word coming out that the mass shooters, the ones that are going into the schools or into the movie theaters, those are the ones who are on these psychotropic drugs that are dealing with their depression or their inability to deal with life. They can't function in society as a quote unquote normal person would, and they're finding that these drugs, and again, this isn't anything I've researched, it's just stuff that I've read here and there, but they're finding that these drugs actually accentuate a lot of the issues, rather than helping them become not depressed. They actually give them other issues to deal with, or make them even more depressed. So, it's crazy what we're actually teaching our children to do, so that when they become adults, they're either turning to the drugs or even worse drugs than the ones they were given earlier in life, or they're lashing out at society through shootings or killing their parents. We just had a young man kill his mom over the Christmas holidays, stabbed her to death, choked her. You know, I'm sure if we start checking into this, you know, you're going to find out that this kid's probably on some kind of, you know, Ritalin or Adderall or one of the other drugs that they're currently giving kids to deal with their ADHD and everything else.
Sure.
Sad. Very sad.
Very. And the knockout game's becoming very popular with inner city youths. The public schools myth of evolution teaches children that they evolved from an animal. So do you think we should be surprised when our children adopt their code of ethics from the animal kingdom?
I'm not sure that that's necessarily what's going on. You know, it again, opinion-wise, you know, the knockout games to me are more of a power thing. These kids who feel they have no power, no ability, they don't have jobs, they don't have any way of you know, self-respect or self-reliance. You know, in order for them to feel powerful, they're, you know, forming these gangs and pseudo families and going out and participating in things like the knockout you know, games that they're doing, or the what are they called, where they run into a store in a gang and completely rob a store as
Flash
a gang.
mobs.
Yeah, the flash mobs. You know, to me, you know, they do reflect more of a very primal, you know, animalistic activity. You know, it's kind of like packs of dogs and you know, wild dogs and such. But for me, it's just a lack of morals and a lack of family. You know, the kids don't have the father figure in the home anymore. In a lot of cases, in a lot of cases, they don't even have a mom. They're raised by the grandparents. You know, or they're on the street. So they you know, do what they do to basically build themselves up. You know, I think it's just, you know, gangs on steroids is really what it boils down to. And it's you know, lack of family and lack of moral training and a lack of faith. You know, I think I heard a statistic not too awfully long ago that there are more families where children do not go to church now than there are families where children do go to church. So,
That's sad.
Yeah.
Could you imagine a day when homeschooling is no longer legal in America?
Absolutely. They're trying it now. They're doing their best. State by state, they're taking action to limit the ability to be able to homeschool. I don't see it being too far in the future that they're actually going to attempt it. There are legal organizations out there to try to help protect the homeschooling families. But absolutely, I do see a time when homeschooling won't be allowed. I mean, look at the German family that tried to come here and stay in the United States. They were appealing for, you know, I can't think of the word right now, but appealing to stay here so that they could homeschool their children because they can't homeschool in Germany. And oh, by the way, that was something that was brought about by Hitler. But you can't homeschool in Germany, and so they came to the United States, looking, you know, for that support and to be able to stay here, and they were refused. I mean, you know, you look at who we allow in this country illegally, and you look at this very strong family unit, faith-based family unit who's trying to teach their kids, educate their kids properly. And they were returned to Germany, while others are allowed to stay here and be criminals. So I don't get it. again, it boils down to what does the government want? The government does not want educated kids. They do not want adults to be able to make decisions on their own. The government wants compliant, quiet people who won't question what they're doing. And, you know, if they allow homeschooling to go along, because the statistics prove that homeschooled children do far better, both in their adult lives as well as, you know, in schools beyond high school, you know, in their education beyond high school. They do much better. You know, hands down, they do much better. They're more rounded, well-rounded citizens and individuals. And those are the ones who are going to continue to push back against government when they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. Whereas the ones that are being turned out from the public indoctrination centers, you know, are just going along with everything because, oh, well, the government says that, you know, they're helping us, or the government says that that's the way it needs to be done, or, you know, our president happens to be a really cool guy, so we need to go along with what he's saying, you know, and the next thing we end up in, you know, chains. We end up with trillions of dollars of debt. Nobody questions why, you know, the government's cutting military retirements, yet they're continuing with increased welfare and extended unemployment benefits. You know, nobody questions that. You know, things are backwards. Nobody questions why things are backwards. And it's because we've had decades, we've had generations of indoctrinations in the public school systems, and people just don't question it anymore.
Well, they've done a really good job of building a compliant society because, I mean, people are just ready to just roll over and accept anything the government throws at them. They'll, you know, they don't mind that their phone calls are being listened to or that their emails are being stored at a center in Utah. The people in Boston last year after the Boston bombing, after the militarized police went through the streets, kicking in door after door after door, going in and harassing law-abiding citizens and dragging them out of in the street at gunpoint with their hands on their heads and shuffling them down to the end of the road to be frisked. After all of that, they were in the street afterwards, cheering and waving that their rights had been absolutely trampled on. So the government's done a really, really good job at building this compliant society. Last year, absolutely. And then last year we saw on Fox News they had a video of a California mother, and her child was being ripped from her arms by police because she wanted to get a second opinion before she consented to surgery for her infant. Can you imagine a day when our children might be taken away from us if we fail to support the state-sanctioned beliefs like evolution or that homosexuality is not a sin?
Yes, I see a day. Because the government has been so successful in turning out compliant citizens. You know, it's like I said, we've got parents now that don't even question the fact that their children are being indoctrinated in the schools. They don't question that. They don't know any better. And with that compliant society, the people who are willing to let the government just, you know, break down their door and come in, because supposedly we're keeping you safe. We're looking for that guy that's still on the run. You know, somebody broke out of prison, so we're going to come knock on all the doors, and, you know, whether we have a search warrant or not, we're going to come into your home, whether you like it or not. You know, it's this mentality that, you know, the government is always right. The government, you know, is not to be questioned. The government is there to take care of you, rather than the government is there to protect you. And it's not the government protecting you as the individual, it's the government's responsibility to protect our borders, to protect the country as a whole. That's why we have a military. People just are not, kids are not taught the Constitution anymore. You ask a kid, and I had this at the expo in Lakeland. It was an example, and I told the dad, I said, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can I ask your son a question? And he said, sure. And I looked at him and I said, can you tell me what kind of government our Constitution gives us? And he kind of hemmed and hawed a little bit, and he's like, well, I think it's a democracy. And I said, you were educated in the public education system because they want you to believe we are a democracy. And actually, we aren't a republic anymore. We haven't been for a while, but our government is supposed to be a republic. And I explained that to the young man. I said, you need to get out your Constitution, and you need to read your Constitution, because they're not going to teach you this in school. You need to teach yourself, and you need to learn what it is that our government is allowed to do and what they are not allowed to do. And, I gave him an example, just a real quick description. It's basic. It's not exact, but it's a basic distinction between a democracy and a republic. Basically, a democracy is where the government rules the people, and a republic is where the people rule the government. It's not 100% accurate, but it's a quick and easy description to hand people, and that's what I told this young man. I also did this. I was at a gun counter, and there's a young man working there, and I asked him the same question. I said, I really don't want to put you on the spot, but, asked him the same question. He came up with the same answer. And I pulled out my Constitution that I carry with me all the time, and I showed him in the Constitution where it says we are a republic. And he said, I'm a history major. And I did not know that. And he's in college. He's a history major in college, and he did not know that we were a republic and not a democracy. You listen to our Congress people on television. You will hear them a lot of the times talk about our democracy. Our president calls us a democracy all the time. It's sad when we have elected leadership who won't even tell you the truth and say that we are a republic. And it's in the process of turning us into compliant people that where we don't question the government, we don't question the fact that they aren't supposed to be making us individually safe, or they aren't supposed to be taking care of us individually. They are supposed to be taking care of us or protecting us as a country. And it's because they have dumbed us down to the point where we don't even read our Constitution and understand what's in the Constitution and what the government's supposed to be doing. And thus, we are compliant. We never question. And we will eventually end up in a point where, yes, government will take your children away from you. Yes, they will stop homeschooling. Yes, we'll never be out of debt. Our children and grandchildren will be paying off, debts for generations to come, if they're ever paid off. I don't think they ever will. Our society, our civilization, America as a whole is dumbed down to the point where we're not the America that we were intended to be by our founding fathers.
Now, you've given us a lot of good stuff to think about. What can we do now before it's too late?
What we have to do before it's too late is we have to educate our neighbors. We have to talk to people in our churches. We have to explain the fact that we have to start educating our children. We have to take control of our schools back. I, for one, I'm running for school board. I want to put myself out of a job because I don't believe, number one, our federal Department of Education is unconstitutional and needs to be gone. Anything that comes out of D.C. that has to do with education is unconstitutional. And Common Core came out of D.C. Common Core was race to the top grant money that was handed to the states so that they could get the states to say that Common Core was a state-led initiative, not a federal initiative, because it is actually against the law. Back in 1995, they had national history standards, and these national history standards were so anti-American, so pro-communism, so bad. Parents, teachers, everybody were up in arms. We hadn't completely become a compliant citizenship yet. And everybody was so up in arms. They raised a stink to the point where the Senate passed a bill, a resolution. It wasn't a bill, it was a resolution that they passed, and it was passed 99-1 that there would not be national education standards or national curriculum. And so in order for Common Core to actually be implemented in the states, it had to be adopted by the states. And thus it was a state-led initiative, not a federal education initiative, a national. And the way they did that was bribing the states with Race to the Top grant money. And the states had a little checklist, and if you agreed to implement Common Core, you got a better chance of getting the Race to the Top grant money. And if you agreed to implement the data mining, the 400 data points that they'll gather on the children, the students, and their families, then you had a little bit better chance. There were 4 or 5 different criteria that improved your chances for getting the Race to the Top grant money. Here in Florida, we ended up with $700 million. And very little of that money actually made it out to the schools. So, you get the politicians with the dollar signs in their eyes, and we end up with, these systems in our schools, and so, all of this is all going to happen because they have been very successful. The progressive education reformers, the people from the late 1800s that follow Karl Marx, have been very patient. They've been very careful in the way they implement what they want accomplished, and we're sitting here years later with the Communist Manifesto pretty much complete, and America pretty much gone.
And of course, we'll have links to your website, but for the folks listening on Stitcher and iTunes and YouTube, can you tell us where we can find you and where we can go to learn more?
I can be reached through an email address. I do have a website, but it doesn't really address anything with the education part of it, unfortunately. I probably need to get something going on that regard. But they can reach me through my email. It is Debbie, DEBBIE, .Gunnoe, and that is GUNNOE, at putgodfirst.co. And that is not .com, it is .co. If you type in .com, I'll never see it. But I'm more than happy to respond to anybody, if they want to drop me an email, if they've got any questions, they've got any rebuttals against my opinion, more than happy to share information with them, and what I have learned through my research when it comes to outcome-based education.
Debbie, thanks again so much for taking time to come on the show and give us all that great information.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
Hey Preppers and Patriots, my new book, American Exit Strategy, Book 1 of the Economic Collapse Chronicles, is now available in audiobook format through Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. Of course, you can still purchase the Kindle edition or paperback edition through Amazon as well. God-fearing patriots and those who believe in the Constitution will find this near-future dystopian novel to be right up their alley. Those who are looking to be more informed about the potential threat to America's financial stability will learn what to watch for and how to prepare themselves for an economic collapse. In Book 1, America is on the cusp of financial annihilation. Matt and Karen Baer face the challenges of Main Street during a full-scale financial meltdown. Government borrowing and monetary creation have reached their limits. When funds are no longer available for government programs, widespread civil unrest erupts across the country. Matt and Karen are forced to move to a more remote location, and their level of preparedness is revealed as being much less adequate than they believed prior to the crisis. Meanwhile, Paul Randall, a third-party presidential candidate, arises to push back against the welfare and warfare spending that have bankrupted our country. Paul Randall proposes a plan to mitigate the coming hyperinflationary collapse, which is a mathematical certainty. His plan is known as the American Exit Strategy. American Exit Strategy uses survival fiction to take an in-depth look at the real-life politics and economics behind the issues that are likely to trigger a currency collapse or financial meltdown in the near future. American Exit Strategy is a work of fiction until it becomes history. Get your copy today at AmericanExitStrategy.com or through Amazon. God bless and happy prepping.